Well, hi, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Rok Zgalin Kobe. I've worked on the architecture line for the past 10 years, 4 of those freelance for the Lego group. And now I'm working on the Lego for adults. And today I'm going to be presenting some of the design guidelines, and the design decisions I've taken in designing the Lego Colosseum, the Taj Mahal, and the Camp Nou Stadium. Any feedback from you guys, or should I just go?
No, you're good right now, Rok.
Excellent. So what I'm about to share with you today is how I tackle designing Lego sets. And first and foremost, I have to stress that when designing an architectural replica, this is exactly what I'm not making with Lego. So I'm not trying to make an exact replica that would be a one-by-one copy of the original building. So like you would in a die-cast model. I don't think that's as suitable for the medium of Lego. What I try to do is try to convey the basic design principle and the basic architectural ideas behind the project, sacrificing some of the real-life dimensions to better bring across the things I deem worthy of showing. And hopefully that makes it at the end a better Lego product as well as a better building experience for while you're building it. So my case in point here would be the Colosseum. And for those of you who've been lucky enough to been to Rome, you were standing in front of the Colosseum, you could see it towering above you. It's a majestic structure, 50 meters tall. But then something happens when you look at this structure from the point of view of we're looking at the Lego set. That's namely the bird's eye view. When looking on it on Google Earth, you realize that it's very flat, that it's very two-dimensional, almost pancake-like. That's because we humans perceive the vertical dimension far differently than we do the two horizontal ones, the width and the depth. And just to illustrate what I mean by that, for example, when you're looking at the opposite side of a room that's like 5 meters away, it's nothing special, it's only 5 meters away. But when you're standing on a ledge that's 5 meters deep, when you look down from the second story, you feel it. You feel it in your heart. You're scared. Those 5 meters make a lot of difference. So, that's an evolutionary way we've came to experience the different dimensions. And therefore, once you're standing underneath the Colosseum, those 50 meters tower above you. And when you climb on top of it, you can get vertigo, while you don't really realize that it's 200 meters wide. So what I'm trying to do in the Lego model is convey that feeling. So I want to convey that monumentality of the set. So therefore, the set itself is almost twice as high as it would be if this was a one-to-one replica of the model. So I really try to capture the verticality of the facade, how it towers above you, the majesty of the original. And I've did that in such a way that I've halved the number of arches that the Colosseum has all around. It would be quite an enormous set if I wanted to capture all 80 of those. So instead, I've only captured 40. While looking on the inside, the amount of ribs, so that's amount of supports that they caved in. So this is where the stands were in the Roman times, covered by the Roman concrete. There's still some places where it's still intact, but in most of them, it crumbled through the cracks, and now it shows the skeleton of the structure. Those are kept as they are in real life. So I have 80 of those. So it's a bit of a cheat to arrive at the finer detail on the inside. The main design decision of the Colosseum was actually the main facade. That's this facade that has been kept mostly intact. For those of you who don't know, Roman Colosseum was a perfectly symmetrical structure until natural disasters took down parts of it. And it was also used as a quarry by the Romans. So a lot of palaces, a lot of other structures were built by repurposing the columns and the stones from the Colosseum. So therefore, it's missing half of the oval here. And then they've basically managed to stop the decay by finishing the edges off, as you can see here. So that's faithfully captured as they've done in the later centuries, once they've became aware that this is a building worth preserving for the future generations as well, for the monument that it is. But allow me to show you what actually guided the design of the Colosseum. It all started out with a simple column. I hope you can see it here on the camera. So these are the columns here. Let me lift it up for you a bit. And these columns are basically a great design feature of the Colosseum because they're representing the history that has been derived through Greek architecture and then integrated into Roman. So the first order of columns is called the Doric. It's a very simple column with a simple base, and a simple capital. The second one is called Ionic. It has volutes. So these are like the horns from what's the male from sheep? Slipped my mind.
Of the ram.
Exactly. Like the horns of the ram, exactly, which are represented here with a minifigure roller skate. So the column itself is built by placing a minifigure candle upside down and topping it with a round 1x1 plate and then a minifigure to represent the volutes. And the third level is a Corinthian column, which is more ornate, which has a top that's flowery, which is here represented by the two 1x1 pieces. So that was basically the main design principle, capturing that slice through history, and then it continues into the pilasters of top, which are also topped by Corinthian columns. So Romans didn't build just a utilitarian statue complex structure with as many seats as possible, like we do for a lot of stadiums today. They've took great care and made it an expression of their architecture and a section through the history of their architecture. So it's a monument in its own right. So I tried to capture that into the Lego form. I think it's very, very educational, and it speaks volumes about the importance the Romans placed on the arts in building what was basically a leisure building at that time. Once I had that in place, once I had that cross section in place with 4 stories, I just replicated it in basically in a 2D form to create a shell. So what you see here, was basically the first model of Colosseum. So it was just placed on a piece of foam, on a piece of cardboard so that it would hold. And that was to sell the concept that if we want to make a Colosseum in Lego, we should make it in such a scale. So I've before, throughout the years, explored it at a different price points, at a small $50 souvenir-like architecture set to a bit more intricate $100 set, but nothing really captured what the Colosseum should convey, its monumentality, its presence. So basically, at Lego, we were talking together in our team. What should we do, since this is a building we should definitely tackle? So it was an exploration of what would be the ideal scale. And the concept itself was actually at the scale we see that the final one be. At that time, we weren't aiming for the biggest Lego set ever. That came fairly late in the process, where the piece count was going up, with more and more details being added on all the levels. And that actually helped spur additional interest, and it was given a green light, so to speak, so that we could make it quite expensive in that regard. But since it has so many pieces, it definitely brings a good value to whoever purchases it. I mean, the price per piece ratio here is extremely good, especially if you're a fan of sand and dark sand pieces. With that, no corners were being cut. And as you build the Lego Colosseum, you can truly see that the internal structure is being faithful to the original as well. So once you're being the little slices which you're placing in the oval, you can see the internal structure, which is made out of arches, which follows the original cross-section of the Colosseum as well. So as you can see on the Lego model, in order to accommodate the high facade, the stands are much more steeper than they are in real life. So this triangle that we see here is far steeper than the one that we would see on the Colosseum. But the eye is deceived. Even though the proportions are so far off, it's actually closer to how we envision the Colosseum if we were actually able to experience it. And if we see pictures from it, which are, of course, taken from the pedestrian perspective, from the eye level, not from the above. So that's one of the illusions I use in creating the architecture and creator expert world building set. So that's vertical exaggeration. One more thing that's perhaps very interesting for you to know, but you wouldn't necessarily notice it for yourself, is that a lot of care has been given to make this appear a symmetric set. But it's far from symmetric. If you look at it closely, it's actually made of completely different ellipses, completely different curves. You can see on the arena that it's not even placed symmetrically, so that it offsets the little differences in geometry. That stems from the nature of the Lego brick. Since we're working in modules and these have different hinge points from here to the other side, since I had to capture a completely different geometry here, I couldn't have continued this curve. But my design guideline was to make these as tight as possible so that there wouldn't be any big gaps. If I was to continue that on that side, then the smaller facade would have exhibited big gaps. So a completely different geometry had to be devised for this side of the building compared to that side of the building. And then it's by using the elements on the inside to marry these two so that they seem completely symmetrical. But if you look closely, you'll actually see the differences. But again, our eyes are deceived. And if you're not looking from it from an extremely right angle, you would never have spotted it if I wouldn't mention it to you. So actually, there you go. It's a point where a lot of the design time and effort goes into hiding something, not into showcasing something. So that's quite interesting from my perspective.
Rok, I have a question.
Sure.
When the initial plans were to design the Colosseum at within the Lego, were you guys sent to Rome to actually get like a visual and get behind the scenes tours, or did you just contact the history department in Rome to get as much information and photos as possible?
Well, I was lucky enough to have traveled there on my own. So,
Okay.
I mean, as a fan of architecture and all things Roman, I mean, at the end of the day, my firstborn is named Rem after Romulus and Remus, the founder of Rome. So that was kind of in the stars to design this one for me, I hope. I was lucky enough to have been there. Otherwise, I travel extensively on a daily basis to different locations. That's via Google Earth,
Right.
which really enables you a close-up view from from anywhere you like. But I have to stress that that's no substitute for experiencing these
Yeah.
structures in real life, because you can only see them online. You cannot
Right.
experience them fully. That's a flat picture on a monitor can never convey its majesty. The
Yeah.
echo when you're standing there gasping at its sheer scale. So I highly advise that whoever has the options to enrich their to enriched by traveling to these awesome places, then you'll hopefully see that some of those experiences have been imbued in the Lego set as well. At least
Right.
that's my goal.
And we have a follow-up question to that, as well as
Sure.
Taggart is asking, is there any Easter eggs hidden within the model?
Well, there are, but I mean, wouldn't necessarily call them Easter eggs, but there's a progression of how you're building the Colosseum. When you're starting off with the base, it's not simply a functional element. For example, the colors there, the supportive colors in one of the first layers are actually all blue. They're blue plates, and they're actually representing that the site of the Colosseum, before it was actually being constructed, was Nero's lake. It was a giant swimming pool made for Nero's palace. Yes, yes. So that's why they were able to stage water battles at the beginning of the Colosseum, because it's built into its basin. So the water supply from the aqueducts was already supplied. So you can see that in the building steps once you're building. So you're touching upon the history of the Colosseum. And then on the other side, when you end up actually with the arena. So there's a part of the original arena that's been reconstructed in the last century, the 1990s, I think. So that it's a wooden arena here. So that's actually the last thing that you place on top, corresponding to how the Colosseum was.
Right.
They've actually made a remodeling of the Colosseum, the Romans themselves. So they've forsaken the ability of the water battles in order to build this intricate labyrinth of the substructure underneath the arena, which allowed for pulleys and elevators, for hidden door traps and so forth. So the things that you've seen in the Gladiator, like lions coming out of the ground, that's all true. They were part of the scenery. I mean, that's just like building the stage in modern day theaters, where you have things from above and below. So
yeah,
that's what they had on the Colosseum as well.
Very cool.
For example, you can see here on the sides, I've placed the little clips represent corbels. This is where the masts were anchored. So, and they were running, imagine there were tall wooden masts running here with wires grounding them to the ground, which were then supporting a retractable roof, a retractable fabric roof, so that it would shield the spectators from the sun. So, and these are the things that are completely mind-boggling to me. So we have a structure that's 2,000 years old, which could seat 100,000 people with a retractable roof. We haven't made anything like that until well into the 20th century, like in the 60s, 70s, that we would have an arena that would come close to that. So these little stories are also captured then in the Lego model. And hopefully, with the amount of time one spends building it, it also inspires one to read a bit more about it. We have a few fun facts in the building instructions, but hopefully that inspires whoever's constructing it to delve deeper on the internet to read about it more, and then they might discover a few Easter eggs extra. So
awesome.
I've tried to be as how do you say that, honest to the original structure as possible, capturing the details on it. So hopefully you can see that and explore a virtual tour of the Colosseum and then see what are the things that have been captured in Lego form as well.
For sure. And so we got one more question. Actually, we've all come leading into each other. Bill is asking, for hundreds of years, the Colosseum was allowed to deteriorate with plants overgrowing the building and ruins. Before the 1800s, when the vegetation was cleared out, did you ever consider designing a variant to show overgrown with plants?
You actually see that here as well. So you have the new recolored 16 by 16 brick plate, so that it's in that's in green.
Oh, the olive green, yeah.
In the olive green, and then you have the earth green at the edges, and that actually symbolizes the unique flora of the Colosseum. And since it actually has its own microclimate, because it's so shielded and there's so much stone which then radiates heat, the Colosseum was used by Druids then in the Middle Ages to cultivate all sorts of plants. So there's actually plants you can only find in the Colosseum to this day. You know, they're not native to that part of Italy at all. They were brought in from all over Europe or worldwide. So that's one of the things that's captured here as well with that color. So I think that's a very fascinating part of the history of the Colosseum. So you can have special plants which they were brewing all sorts of concoctions back in the Middle Ages. So another fascinating facet from the history of the Roman Colosseum captured in Lego. So these are the so-called Easter eggs that one can find in the Lego model.
It's very cool. I didn't know any of that. That's quite cool.
Any more questions on the Colosseum, or should we make it all about the Colosseum, or would you like me to spend some time on some of the other models?
I think we can probably move on to another model. It seems to be the questions for the Colosseum done. I mean, if anything pops up, we can always jump back at the end about it. So.
Sure. But then I'm going to bring you to the Indian subcontinent. Well, we're going to take a look at a jewel of Mughal architecture that is the Taj Mahal. And it's much easier to hold in the hand compared to the Colosseum. I mean, this only clocks in with 2,000 pieces, but the level of detail is just as intricate as it is on the Colosseum. Hopefully it's not too bright in the camera. That's just the white marble shining really strongly. But a few design considerations that I had here that I can share with you. First is the color. The original building is all white. I mean, it has gems encrusted into its stonework when you're looking at it up close, but the experience from afar is of all whiteness. So I wasn't quite true to that. As you can see on the model, is it too bright for you guys?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit, that's fine. A little bit far back just to get some shadow onto it.
Yeah, it's quite contrasty with my overhead lamp here. But I've really played here with dual tone. That is the white and the sand color. And I've used the sand color to emphasize depth. So wherever there's a shadow line, which a three-dimensional object would be cast in real life, I used sand so that it appears like there is a shadow line. So even though it's a flat build here, the change of color suggests that something's happening in the 3D. As well as in all the recesses, then the second plan, even though it's white, in real life is then made out of tan color on the inside. So that provides an extra bit of depth and makes the model pop out a bit. So it's not as flat as it would be if it would be made completely out of white bricks. The same things with the balconies on the minarets. And just like with the Colosseum, I've exaggerated some of the dimensions on the Taj Mahal. For example, there was a bit of discussion online that the minarets are too thin. But that was the design goal that the architects, the constructors of the building were having. They were going for slenderness, for reaching towards the sky. So I think it's a much better compromise if they're a bit thinner than if they would be a bit thicker. Because in Lego, since we're limited by the module, I cannot find the perfect dimension all the time. So you either have to round it up or round it down. And in this case, I was rounding everything down so that it could be made more slender, so that it would show the filigrane nature of the structure, of how it points out and reaches toward the sky. But other than that, the proportions are quite true to the original, since it is an exercise of a geometric composition. So both in the floor plan and in the section, you can clearly see the delineation into squares. So the main building is made out of 3 by 3 squares, which is then captured on the inside as well. So the building is constructed with 9 modules of 6 by 6 Lego plates. And it allowed me, by raising the base, it allowed me to capture the inside of it, which hosts the crypt in the basement, which has the only asymmetrical element in the whole of the structure. That is the actual tomb of the Shah, which is placed next to his wife. Originally, there's some, it can be contested, but as popular belief goes, since the Taj Mahal was constructed to honor his most beloved wife, the Shah was planning to build himself the same building, only in black marble on the opposite side of the river. So, and some of the marble can already be found there. So the construction would have become, but his own son would then imprison him into house arrest when he took power. And when the dad died, they've just placed his tomb next to his wife's tomb. So that's in the Lego form as well. And if you would to take a look on the inside, so this is below, this is in the crypt where the actual bodies are buried. But there's a cenotaph in the main room, which is much more ornate. And those are just like the fake tombs, which are then in the main, which are then housed in the main hall. And you can see those while you're building the structure, which can be inserted. So if you take a look at the original cross-section of the building, the Lego model follows that as well. And another thing where a lot of effort, design effort has went into is creating these little shatris, the onion domes that flank the main dome. So they're being held together with 8 columns on each side, and I wanted to replicate that in Lego as well. And if you have the chance of building it, you can see that it's quite a complicated building step. But I really didn't want to have a transparent piece in the middle, or an axle or something that would support it, so that it's actually being held in place with the columns on the side, which are in this case just robot arms. So I'm trying to stay true to the original tectonics, to the original massing of the structure, and incorporate as much of that as possible into the Lego form. Anybody has any questions?
Yeah, Ben's asking just for the building technique of the central onion dome and how that was achieved.
Yes, there's a bit of an Easter egg there as well. I mean, if you're building the Taj Mahal, the colors that are used are representative of the history of the structure. So both of its original architects as well as India of today. So, and for example, the onion dome is then built upside down. And in the middle, you can actually see an allusion to the Ashoka chakra. That's the wheel in that you can find in the flag of India in the middle as well. That's the blue wheel. That's I mean, it's very worth reading into what it represents. I think it sends a very lovely message. But that's captured then in the color of the Lego bricks used here in order to achieve the round shape. So, and the number corresponds to the spikes on the wheel as well. I hope that that answers the question that you were having. Otherwise, I can elaborate further. So it's basically, we're switching dimensions from being from being properly to being building upside down, where we're placing the domes, and then switching directions in the middle layer again in order to create this sphere, which then rests in the oval, which then approximates the onion dome.
Very cool. Just gonna see if our live audience has any questions in Seattle. So if anybody's got a question, just give it a few seconds here.
Yes.
Hey there. I was curious how the fact that we've already seen a Lego Taj Mahal, and it was a very prominent set in relatively recent history, intentional ways in which you built a bridge between that building experience and this version, or ways in which you wanted to differentiate this building experience so somebody who had done the larger earlier model has a unique and different building experience with this new interpretation.
Yeah, so there's no connection as such, since it's a completely different build. It's at a completely different scale. What I tried to capture in the builds is the scale, which I think, I'm not saying that I'm always right, far from it, but that in my eyes, it's the most optimal for the given building. Of course, it can be done at different scales, but I was the big one felt a tad too big for me, to be honest. So hopefully you have the same amount of detail or close to in what is perceived a better value set, since it has lower piece count and therefore a bit less repetitive building experience, even though the nature of the building, since it's symmetrical, of course requires a bit of repetition. But what I've tried to do here is really differentiate the different builds so that you would discover something new in terms of building techniques and so forth, so that you would have a pleasant building experience from start to go. And of course, you then top it off with the roof that comes apart, revealing the main hall in the middle and the minarets at the sides. So hopefully that answers your question.
Any next question, if there's one? I can't see the Seattle audience, so if somebody else is in line there with the microphone, just speak up.
Currently, no other questions.
Alrighty, we've got another question online then. Richard's asking, is there a specific element that defined the scale for this version of the Taj Mahal?
Well, I had to start with the basic 3x3 grid of the main structure. So it's either a 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, and so on. And then it's actually the little arch, the 1x3 arch, that can capture these ivans here nicely. And then the main shape, which captures, these are called ivans, the half-opened, so this negative space here, which is underneath the arch. So it's basically the two arches translate very well from the original structure. So that was the guiding motive. And then it was a matter of finding the shapes. Another aspect where I cheated a lot was bringing the minarets further in, therefore eliminating a lot of the base. I hope that whoever owns the set would agree that having the minarets spaced out further out, like they are in the real life, wouldn't be worth the extra money you would have to pay, so that you would just construct a much wider base with a lot of the repetitive plates being placed on top. So that's where I've tried to save some value and to put it into the main structure while approximating the overall scale. And since we see the building, usually, you see it up close, therefore the perspective makes the minarets appear wider as they are, so that the eye is fooled in that sense again. So it's not a one-by-one representation, but hopefully, at least my goal is to make it a better one for the Lego model.
Awesome. Hopefully that answers Rich's question. I think it does. So awesome. We're free and clear questions at the moment, so we can continue on there, Rok.
Well, lovely. Then we'll fast forward a few centuries to another arena, and that is the Camp Nou. Just a sec. Well, the main design difference that you can see from the Camp Nou compared to the Colosseum is the base. Since the base in the Colosseum is big in order to support the entirety of the structure, Camp Nou comes apart in 5 pieces for easy disassembly and easier carrying around. But it also translates into a sleeker model, so that we don't have to have as many Lego bricks going into the base, so that it's supported in its entirety. A lot of the learnings from the Colosseum were actually incorporated into the Camp Nou, since it's quite similar in some ways, yet different in many others. So the floor plan is not an ellipse. It's rectangular with 4 distinct curves. So the building techniques are therefore different as in the Colosseum. And during the build, since the sections here are thinner, I discovered that I can't use the same techniques of ball joints, which are holding together the Colosseum. So these are held together then by clips in various levels. What I like to stress, and which I think is quite important for these models, they're all designed with existing Lego pieces. So there hasn't been a piece that was designed for any of them. And for that matter, for any of the sets that I've made during the years for Lego architecture. Because I think that would be cheating in a way. It would be fairly easy to construct a perfect element, but then where do you stop? You could end up with a die-cast model. So I actually think it's quite important that we showcase the versatility of the Lego brick. Basically, you can build anything you want from the existing pieces, that the imagination is the limiting factor, not the shape of the Lego element. So I think that I pride myself on that, actually, that we are able to build all of these sets with existing bricks only. And if you look at the Camp Nou, it's very curvy. There's a lot of curves that are connected, but we're not using a single round element. Everything's constructed with regular rectangular bricks and slopes. So fairly basic Lego pieces that we've known for decades. Yet we're able to arrive at such a complex shape. And here, just like the Colosseum, the vertical is again exaggerated, which allowed me to capture all 3 all three tiers of the seating. So the bottom, the middle, and the top, which are then at different levels, so that all the spectators have the same view of the pitch. The pitch itself is taken one by one from the Old Trafford set that Mike Psyche designed. And I had his help with this one here as well. So he's very much an active member in everything that we do. And that means that these two stadia are in scale. And since Camp Nou is a bit bigger than the Old Trafford, that then corresponds in its overall size and in the price point for that matter as well. But I thought that that was a cool feature to have, that whoever is a fan of football and stadia would be able to have them side by side and they would be in scale. Are there any questions that you guys might have regarding the Camp Nou Stadium in Barcelona?
None online. Anybody in the Seattle audience have a question?
Well, I've got one, which is if someone gets both stadiums as they're building, are they going to be dramatically different build experiences, or is there going to be a lot of repeated elements or repeated build styles between the two?
Far from it, because the geometries of the buildings are completely different. So Old Trafford is more orthogonal, and Mike captured a lot of the angles of the stands there. So you have different building techniques that connect it. Whereas this one is much more uniform compared to the Old Trafford, because Old Trafford was built and rebuilt in numerous ways, and that shows. So it's not a uniform. It's not a uniform object like Camp Nou is. Camp Nou has the same facade running all around, whereas Old Trafford doesn't. But it has a glass front on the entrance side where it links to the museum. It has the overhanging roof on this part of the stands where it features the FC Barcelona letterings on the stand. So, I mean, the nature of the model, there's of course similarities. They're both Lego buildings with stands, but I still think that for a true aficionado, there's a variety of completely different building techniques that in certain ways arrive to the same result at the end. So that's what's fascinating, that we have to solve basically the same problems, but we do it in a very different way. So they're completely different in that respect. I don't think that building one would help you to know how the other one is constructed.
All right, thank you. We do have one more question here.
You did mention the vertical exaggeration and exactly why you did it on the Colosseum, and that you also did it again here. I was curious if you use the same level of exaggeration, or how you arrived at the decision how to create, the mind's eye expression of the building, and what you kind of learned from one and applied to the other.
Well, both of them are designed in. So basically, both of these sets were designed in section first. So I was making a cross section through one of the stands, as well as on the Colosseum, so the triangle. And here, I thought that it was very important to capture the three tiers of seating. Then I would move to a floor plan, which means I would be designing in 2D. If you would look from the top, I was trying to arrange the sections so that you would arrive to this iconic shape. So basically, with both the Colosseum as with the Camp Nou, I was designing 4 different things separately that would then marry later on in the process to create the whole. That is cross-section through the lower tribune, through the higher tribune. So that's just like on the Colosseum, 2 completely different geometries, which only appear the same when looked from the top. The 2D the floor plan of it, and of course the practicalities of the base, and then the detailing at the end. So you would basically polish these things and then see how they translate into the 2D view, then seeing whether the geometry in 2D fits, then taken the learnings from that back to the sections, so that you're jumping from one design to the next. But I would have 4 distinct stadia on the table, one in 2D, then different cross sections. And once these were married together, it would all come together. So it's not like that I would be building with a full building. That was very late in the process that everything actually comes together. So for the Colosseum for example, the first time it came together was right before what we call the heat test. That's a very interesting step in our design process, which ensures us the quality of the Lego, of the finished product. What we actually do is we simulate the weathering of a Lego set. So we simulate how it would be if such a set would stand in a windowsill for years, would be weathered by the sun and the elements, so that the plastic would lose some of its original clutch power, so that it becomes softer. Would the model still hold? We'd like to make a model that's not only good in the first year, but that can be enjoyed for decades. I mean, my children are playing with the Lego that my mother had, for example, and everything still fits together. So we need to assure that our models do too. But with a model at such a scale, I was of course nervous. Would it, after hours in an oven, which would soften it, would it then crumble when you pick it up, when you take it away? Because it's supposed to be strong enough to survive the heat test. So it only came together for the heat test. And I have to say I was really relieved when I was able to pick it up. It was a bit more creaky, but everything held together. So it could bend and flex, but it could take all the stresses. There wouldn't be a stress point in the model where it would crack. It was actually designed that it's able to bend and twist, the Colosseum, once you're picking it up. Whereas on the Camp Nou, I was able to save a lot of Lego elements and therefore a lot of money at the end price by designing it in such a way that it's not meant to be picked up in its entirety, so that you can actually split it apart and then carry it with separate pieces. Otherwise, it would demand a much, much thicker base to have it all. And since I wasn't working with a blank check like the Colosseum to begin with, that was the compromise I thought that's worthy to have in order to capture more of the detail of the original building.
Awesome. We'll jump over here for a question. Bill is asking, besides old Stratford and Camp Nou and the Colosseum, is there a stadium that if you had the choice that you would like to build, and how would you approach that differently?
Well, as you know, and I'm actually tired of saying that all the time, I really cannot discuss any potential or future products. And since I'm an architecture buff, I don't want to speculate on any building in the world, since I'm hoping that we'll make them all eventually.
Yeah.
So I will say no. I will have to pass that one with a no comment.
Okay, fair enough. And then Alfred's asking, when you design these, do you use a lot of digital design tools to help and start the mock and to finish it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm helping myself out with whichever tools I find do the job at that point in time. I mean, for these, I was of course approximating everything in the computer, so because it's easy to scale to a grid, so that I could see how it translates into Lego. I would then print various things out in scale, so that I could construct it in Lego. Of course, Google Earth was an invaluable tool for designing here, since I was able to see the building from all angles without actually having to go there, even though I would very much prefer to go there, especially if there are bosses from Lego listening. I think that's well worth the few extra days in the process to capture the overall experience. And hopefully we'll get to design a lot of buildings in a lot of fine and exotic places in the future. But yeah, it's, of course, the medium of Lego, the good old pencil and paper, computer with various programs, other are building software or the drawing software that allows you to draw things in 2 dimensions over existing pictures. So that's the working process.
Right on. So I'm just getting a message. We're just time to start wrapping it up here. So
Sure.
hopefully there was no other questions in the theater audience. If there is a short question, I think we might be able to squeeze it in. If not, thank you very much for the presentation and joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.